The next piece I want to talk about is the rook. Rooks, very powerful pieces. The rooks go up and down, side to side. However, they cannot go diagonal. Rooks are strongest in the center of the board. So, with a rook being here, rooks can attack the same rooks can attack up to 14 squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on both the vertical and the horizontal sides, if you will. Vertical going up and down, horizontal left to right or right to left. So rooks, can cover all these squares at the same time. And also to keep in mind, rooks, with the help of a king, are the only pieces needed to deliver checkmate, and that is something that everyone needs to know about, because checkmate signals the end of a game. Checkmate signals that someone has won by checkmating the enemy king. So that's how the rooks move. Same with the other rook. They both have the same abilities. Up and down, side to side. Can go here if it wants to, here if it wants to. And then get to the most powerful piece. The queen goes on its own color to start a game. That's one thing to keep in mind. Queens are the most powerful pieces for a reason. And the reason why the queens are the most powerful pieces is because they can get down the board in the fastest manner. Not only from side to side, but diagonal as well. And that's what makes the queen the most powerful piece, because it can cover the most amount of squares. So I mentioned earlier that pawns cover a max of 2 squares. Knights cover a max of 8 squares. Bishops cover 13 squares. And then rooks cover a max of 14 squares. So, with that said, the queen can cover 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14 squares alone, plus the 13 that the bishop covers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So the queen can cover a max amount of 27 squares, and that makes it by far the most powerful piece on the board. The queen covers the same amount of squares as both the rook and the bishop combined. So that's saying a lot about the queen. And last but not least, the king. This is the one piece that has its own unique ability as well. Kings are in the starting position here, and I'm also going to add a rook on each end, because kings have a special move that no other piece has. As I said earlier, each piece, just like people in life, have a different skill set or a different ability. So kings start in the middle of the board on the E file. Kings can only move one square at a time, generally speaking. So if the kings are up in the middle, generally the kings cover the same amount of squares as the knight. The only difference is kings can cover different colors and knights cannot. That is the main difference between the king and the knight as far as which squares they can cover. They both cover the same amount of squares at one point or simultaneously, and that number is 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. As I mentioned with the knights, if this was a knight on this square, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, scratch that. If this was a knight, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there actually is a big difference. The big difference is the knight covers a wider area than the king. Now that special move that the king has that no other piece has is called castling. The rook, also known as a castle, is its main counterpart when it comes to this move. So the rule of thumb for castling, there are 3 important rules to remember when it comes to castling. First one is it must be the first move of the game for both pieces. What happens is the king can move 2 spaces, 1, 2, and then you bring the rook on the other side. This is called castling. This is called a kingside castle because you are castling on the king's side of the board, as opposed to this side, which is called queenside castling because it is on the queen's side of the board. The queen pretty much controls this side of the board, or this is the queen's domain, this is the king's domain. So when you castle on the queen's side, if you decide to do that during a game, 1, 2, and then you bring the rook over. Very powerful move, especially when you want to get your rooks to the center of the board. And it is critical that you do that as early as you can in the game. We'll talk about that later on as well in another video. So kings, also want to mention those other 2 rules. Besides it being the first move of the game, you cannot castle through check or out of check. And what that means is check is when a piece that is attacking the king is threatening checkmate or threatening the king in general. So for example, if there was a knight right here you can't castle. That it would be an illegal move. Cannot castle out of check, through check, and you cannot castle if you've already moved either the king or if you've moved the rook. You can't castle on this side, but if you have the first move of the game for both of these pieces, you can still castle on this side as long as the king does not pass through check or is not trying to castle out of check. So in this case, the king cannot castle. The king would only have two options if it's in check. That is actually only two options. In this case, the king only has one option, and that is to simply move out of check, whether it's here, 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 or here. So 4 spaces that are available for the king to move to. King cannot move here because the king would still be in check. The other option, if that option is on the table, would be to capture the attacking piece, therefore removing it from the board, and therefore getting your king out of check. So you want to keep your king out of check at all times, and protect your king at all times so it's kept out of danger. Also, you cannot castle through check. So if you go to castle, once the king passes f1, it would be in check by this bishop. Therefore, this castling would be an illegal move. So that is how all of the pieces move. Kings, once again, can go one space at a time, and they can only castle, or they can only move 2 spaces when they're castling. And that's the only time that the king can move 2 spaces, only when it is castling with the rook. That is the conclusion of this video. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe below